episode of a podcast. What's our theme going to be?
Oh God, then you got to do it with him.
What's today's theme?
Today's theme.
Just before we start, to introduce.
We're all into music. Let's talk about music on this one.
Sure. I just want to introduce the podcast. This is a CornerSpeak podcast, episode number 2. Sort of like a pilot test run done in very rudimentary technology using the iPhone. That aside, we are now going to begin with the theme of today. Oh, we happen to be at the Union Jack in Suffolk as well. Nolia David's pub. The Nolia David. Yeah. Vocalist, singer, Nolia David. Businesswoman.
You got to
Nolia,
say something.
Do you want to introduce yourself to our unsuspected audience?
Good afternoon, all of you. Well, I don't know what to say next.
Well, we're going to talk about music, Dave suggested. I wanted to touch on politics, but he doesn't want to go there today.
I only say I don't know what to say next as part of a theatre, speech, or lyrics, or script, whichever you want to go forward with. Life is about the stage. It's about actors. It's about actors.
Well, Nolia,
no actress anymore. It is a stage. Life is a stage. 7 stages of men.
Okay.
Even Shakespeare said that.
You're right.
So there you are.
Okay. That's a worthy quote.
Right.
We're getting in dangerous ground there because you and I are heading towards the last stage of the, when you.
That was during Shakespeare time, and now
drooling again.
I agree. In Shakespeare's time, 300 years ago, right?
Yeah.
7 stages of man. Now it's 10 stages of men.
Oh yeah.
People live up to 100.
Oh yeah, longer life expectancy.
Right.
Name them then. Name the 7 stages first.
Come back.
That's what I was
Bring
about
me
to ask.
back to what you want to talk about.
So Dave wants to discuss the broad and wide subject of music.
What is the state of jazz music today, particularly in the UK?
You sure you wanna have that
Because
discussion?
we're all into jazz, aren't we?
Yeah, but primarily.
Has been a promoter promoting jazz in various clubs and pubs.
Yeah, but primarily we're all rounders as well. We recently spent most of our time playing mainstream music.
I know, but it's a good sort of topic to focus on, right?
Yes, go there.
Yeah. Well, let me ask Nolia.
Jazz is a general word for a certain type of music for which 100 years ago, for instance, during the time of cotton picking days in New Orleans, the singers who were picking the cotton, bless them, don't read music, but amongst themselves they sing. Hence, Gershwin, watching them doing this, was so surprised and impressed and started a jazz school for the owners of the cotton picking fields. Hence, the song Summertime. So, think deeply on those lyrics. You'll understand what jazz is all about.
How about, could you sing it for us then? Sing Summertime. Sing a verse of Summertime now. That's what you do, you sing, you're a singer.
Yeah, but...
Well, we can probably return to that opportunity.
Younger people.
Well, you'll get to hear Nolia showing off her vocal skills, because we also have the CornerSpeak CBC CornerSpeak band channel, where we're going to be doing 30-minute showcases and short performances, including some acoustic jazz combo performances and some one-to-ones with Nolia. As a matter of fact,
on that note, I will adhere to your request, Dave. And Dave is an amazing pianist, and it's a shame we haven't got the piano here now, but I will do an a cappella of just a verse. But not to the beat of the music in this pub. I can try and be independent of that.
Yeah, try not to get thrown by the background music.
Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping, the cotton is high. Your dad is here, and your ma is good looking. So, baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings. There you are.
Excellent.
Next verse comes another time.
Yes, nice.
Brilliant. Well done.
Next time you hear Nolia singing that song, you'll hear her accompanied by myself and Dave Williams on piano, playing some live acoustic jazz on the CornerSpeak CBC channel.
It's a shame the piano. Oops. Can you?
So anyway, yeah. So where are we?
It's a shame the piano is not switched on. Otherwise, we would go on there. You would play, and you. It's one of those things. See what I'm saying? That's why impromptu is the word. Impromptu is the word.
When the bass used to be in the studio, I could have run next door, grabbed the bass, turned on the piano,
That's why I said
plugged it
about
all
get
in.
the feel, get the feel.
Well, another time. This, we kind of just we're doing the preliminaries now. We've heard a bit of Nolia's voice.
When we do the actual one-to-one with Nolia, we'll arrange it so we'll pick up Nolia, bring her to studio, then we can do the her
I hesitated a bit.
interview.
Thank you for your request.
No, that's
And do a song.
where are we with jazz?
So that was an introduction to jazz,
You
going
keep talking. I'm
really
gonna
back
check.
to the early
I'll be
days.
back. No.
Do you want to take over from where Nolia left off, Dave? I think we was in New Orleans at the time. She was talking, giving her perspective of on the origins.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking more at where are we with jazz today. See, unfortunately, I don't get to hear or play much jazz. I don't think you do either at the moment.
Not at the moment, no.
Because we're trying to make it kind of as best a living as we can, playing what people want to hear. Which
Playing live music in the arena that we're closest to, which is the point, because there's always jazz music going on all over the world, in every town, every city, to different extents.
I think, you see, my impression, from what I gather of the jazz scene, particularly in London now, is that you've got a lot of very good, I've heard, some very, very good young jazz musicians. And they've done their homework, they've been to the music schools, they've learned the techniques, they're technically very, very good. But I'm not sure if they are kind of aware of or steeped in the tradition that jazz has been in over the decades. Yeah, so I think it's almost like jazz to the younger people today has become like a form of music where the aim is to become as technically proficient as possible, but you don't necessarily share the ethos of the old jazz musicians that were coming up 100 years ago, like Nolia said, in the New Orleans sort of cradle of it.
2 points I'll make. I've heard some of the older school traditional jazz musicians suggest that from a certain point in time, the definition or the titles, the labels that jazz you would find jazz coming under in terms of shows, festivals, and all the rest, had become very broad and almost watered down, where you would get somebody who, in all, don't know what the word is. Essentially, somebody you might regard as a mainstream popular musician based on the music they've released and what they spend most of their time playing, headlining a jazz festival, so you've got that where the definition of what people will call jazz music has broadened out to a large extent. I think.
Very true, yeah.
And then the other one is, I think it's something that people have to live to an extent. So the young musicians coming out of music school, the ones who genuinely have an interest in jazz, and they probably grew up listening to it, around them, from their parents or maybe the environment they found themselves in, and they've got a personal liking for the music before they mastered their instrument. instrument, I would say they would know. They'll be aware of the traditions, and they'll be aware of the fact that you learn the skills of those who came before you, and then you join that with where you are in your generation, and you add to it. So although I would say, the other side of the coin, one being what people call jazz today is probably not what people 50 years ago would put under the umbrella of the term jazz. And the second side is, I think you have to live with the music anyway, so you might be a well-trained musician with good knowledge of the music historically. Your approach to music and what you bring to the bandstand is going to constantly change as you age and grow with the music, and that's what I think really makes an accomplished jazz musician. It's not just the skills. Some people get there very early and have outstanding skills at an early stage. I think what evens the playing field is everyone has to live with the music to really kind of get closer to the essence of what they bring to the bandstand when they get up and improvise and play under that banner that we call jazz music. So that's where I think I won't take too much away from the music school graduates who've chosen to probably forfeit some of the benefits of success in the mainstream music and live as a jazz musician. So I suppose some of them will do better than others. Generally, I think they're going to live and grow with the music, and that's what's going to shape who they are as musicians. So I think it's very difficult for somebody of a young age to just come out of music school, attain a certain level of musicianship on their instrument, and play jazz and have the full complete package, because some of it I think comes over time. That's the point I was trying to make, in a very long-winded, round-the-houses sort of way.
Yeah. All right, but how far do you think you can actually play jazz, let's say properly in inverted commas, get inside because jazz started out, it kind of evolved from the blues, and the blues was like a kind of a protest music. Jazz has been like a protest music over the decades. There was a time when jazz was very mainstream, actually. We call that in the 30s, 40s, 50s in America, particularly, when jazz was kind of, it was played in ballrooms. I've even seen, there's a film from the a British black and white film I saw recently from the 1950s, maybe
it's not 60s. The one with Count Basie,
and there was a
small jazz club.
A dance club where the music being played by the live band was bebop. It was outright bebop.
Yeah, but there's something we've all missed
people
here.
Dancing to it.
I get that, Dave. I think it's something we've all missed in this conversation.
But jazz isn't that mainstream anymore like it used to be.
Of course. Everything,
50, 60 years ago.
Everything changes and evolves. I think there's one thing we've missed, so we haven't brought into the conversation yet, that underpins the whole of what we're talking about here. And that's the fact that the music originally, with its African roots rhythmically and origins in the blues and gospel and spiritual music, what do they used to call it, Negro spirituals. The thing we haven't mentioned is this music came out of the dance halls, and I'm only saying that because that's what I've heard over many years, and when I've listened to many jazz legends being interviewed or comments they've made, that this one key thing they've always highlighted, and I know me and you've had this conversation before, and I've brought it up many times and quoted examples of people like Dizzy Gillespie, where he's highlighted this fact that he grew up playing in dance halls, playing to people who dance to the music, and his earliest experience of jazz, we didn't use those words, but that's the gist that I got, was it was a form of music that people dance to, and that's the big key element that I think is missing when you look at the young musicians, as you described previously, virtuosos striving for certain things in their musicianship, and in their minds or their circles, they're regarding that as that's the criteria that determines a good jazz musician. Often what's been forgotten is all of this music came out of dance halls. It was there to an extent entertain the audience and to provide something for people to dance to, and I think that's a big thing we miss.
I agree, but I think maybe there are different strains of jazz, and that form of jazz would have come from the Dixieland, the track.
Yeah, I don't even think it's strange.
Very bouncy.
I don't even think it's strange, David. I'm gonna give you.
Where do people like Miles Davis come in? Miles Davis was kind of.
He came in from the beginning. He came in from his predecessors. I would say, I think that the earliest name I can think of is King Oliver, and then Satchmo, and then Dizzy, and then Miles Davis, and then you had a ton of people also in between those key sort of names and eras. I mean, we're doing this podcast as an audio podcast at the moment. When we do the live stream show and we cover this topic again, we'll be able to bring in examples and documentary clips and video clips where you'll see people like Dizzy Gillespie and other bebop legends telling that story of how they started out playing in dance bands and to people dancing to music, and culturally they knew the music as dance music. Nobody in the community saw it as anything outside of that until you kind of got to, I think, around the bebop era, where it started to turn into a concert form of music and it started to become intellectualized.
Yeah, exactly. So therefore, somebody at that point was taking it in a different direction.
Or somebody's. Obviously, there's always someone in front. There's always somebody in front.
You know, like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and
those guys came from the dance band era.
Coltrane, Miles Davis, but alongside that, parallel to that, there was
and the Duke Ellingtons.
Duke Ellington, I think he may have been a bit of a crossover, because Duke Ellington and Count Basie, those big bands, they were essentially like dance bands. Still, they were continuing that tradition of jazz as a dance medium. No? But there were others who were taking it in a much more,
trying to think of a name,
like a European classical kind of approach, where you go to a concert and the last thing you think of would be getting up and dancing to some kind of it's almost what we used to call avant-garde, experimental music, because that's what a lot of jazz. That's
just another area. That's just another aspect of jazz. I think this is when it started to leave the dance halls. I think it started to split up into different categories, and you started to see the subcategories forming. Before all of that, obviously, with any kind of music, classical music, pop music, blues, gospel, there's always different shades of this, of that form of music. With jazz in the way, like we would say, popular music, and in that umbrella there's lots of different things, hip hop, pop, country to an extent, and lots of things you can put R&B under that umbrella. I think that sort of happened to jazz from a certain point in time. If you take it back to its earliest origins, I'm sure it was already still many things. The most obvious thing, I suppose, identifier was the fact that it was a music that people danced to. It had a heavy rhythmic aspect to it, and it was a music that moved people to dance before it became a music that moved people to think intellectually, which is what happened to which is the direction of lots of the elaborate forms of music, and what's the word I'm looking for? Obviously, improvised music is, went in the direction of something that became quite intellectual. I would say just loosely speaking, the early Miles career began and overlapped the end of the big band era, when the band started to, when the small band became the standard format for all kinds of reasons, economical reasons. I think people were going off to war and stuff like that, probably things were changing in terms of the small clubs as opposed to the big dance halls, and the music changed with it in order for people to continue to eat and earn a living. Because as you said earlier, we at times in our musical journey we played a lot of jazz. There was time in music we predominantly played jazz, and other times where we didn't play much at all. The reason being, we made the decision that we want to work and keep performing as musicians, and to some degree, based on something being your bread and butter. Okay, thank you. Something being your bread and butter, we decided to, play more of one form of music than another, because we found access to work in that genre. We found it more accessible. So I think the early jazz musicians, they were influenced and made some changes to what they did as working musicians based on the economy as much as anything else, like we still do today.
Right. Probably a good point to...
And it's going to affect the music as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What happens in the music? Big bands, dance bands was the theme at one point in time. And the dance venues, I call them, this is my point of view, I look at them as they were the DJ of that era. People went out to dance and they danced to a big band, and then for whatever reason, those promoters stopped or couldn't afford to pay for that amount of musicians, and the bands became smaller sometimes for practical necessities as much as anything else. And the music was affected as well, because if you've got a 7-piece band as opposed to a 14 or 12 or 18-piece band, and you've got big arrangements for lots of different instruments, you have to scale that down musically to accommodate 4 or 7 musicians. So it's going to change the music over time.
Yeah, no doubt. And also, of course, music develops along.
What do you say to that? I'm only joking.
Well, I was just thinking, in terms of reducing the number of musicians. See, that started to happen when electric instruments started to be developed, because music does go along, develops along with the technology that becomes available to make it with.
Yeah.
And in the mid 50s, or even earlier, of course, you started getting people like Les Paul.
I was going to say, I was just trying to find that name.
Developing the electric guitar. And it was taken up by, because the whole rock and roll thing came about in the mid 50s. You're looking at Elvis, Bill Haley, all the great rock and roll.
You know what I heard?
That's 1950s onwards, and they were kind of, I suppose, assisted by the technology.
Can I just interject something there, Dave?
Were
From what I understand, Fender gave the first electric bass to Count Basie's bass player while he was still in the big band.
Right, there you are. Yeah.
He was the first bassist, from what I understand, to be seen using that electric bass in jazz.
Right.
And he still played his double bass at that period of time too. That's the story I heard.
Right, okay.
So as you said, technology affected the...
I wouldn't doubt it, because there is obviously a transition. It's just that, looking back, it seems like the rock and roll thing came in pretty quickly and pretty suddenly, and I think it did actually put paid to a large extent to the traditional.
It shut down a lot of the jazz,
big bands,
the need for jazz bands.
And probably this is why a lot of jazz musicians felt they had to, as you say, form smaller groups.
Yeah,
to get like the quartets, the quintets,
staff. Yeah,
which kind of which developed because
survival to an extent.
Rock and roll thing, and then I think there was a continuation. Obviously, the big band music is even now still fairly popular, in certain situations. You can still go. You can still go and hear big band concerts.
It still exists. Just like
Um,
classical orchestras, at one point in history, we might have to go about hundreds of years, was the standard form of hearing people's compositions and hearing music, and whatever the trending composer at that time was, at hearing their work was through an orchestra. It's very expensive to pay, that amount of musicians. So now it's more of an elitist
Nowadays,
thing.
In the old days, all the orchestras were employed by the nobility. You had the Duke of so and so, and the
king,
the
the
church,
queen,
the churches, the bishop of any diocese,
or
certainly
wealthy patron.
in Europe, especially in Germany, Austria, places like that, they would all have their own orchestras and choirs, music directors,
And it was still expensive then. That hasn't changed.
Maybe,
it was still expensive.
I don't know, but
Your ordinary person couldn't afford that kind of music to access it. It was just for the elites.
Generally, certainly the audiences,
It
But I
was
don't
private.
think they didn't have to pay the musicians much, because the musicians would have got they would have got accommodation and food supplied, I'm pretty sure,
I think they still were working musicians in orchestras and all the rest, because, okay, I'm taking some of this from what I've seen in the media, like autobiographical movies on Mozart or Beethoven or something like that, and they all seem to have been, when they were coming up, say like they left the church or whatever, so they were being funded by the church. That's how they'll pay their rent, eat, and be able to sit down and compose music. That's how they'll pay their way. And we're talking about an era where most people in populations survived off of having a craft, or you were just a labourer, almost like a slave labourer, back in the real, how would you describe it? Well, we're talking, what centuries are we talking about now?
I mean, the
14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century onwards.
Yeah, the high point of what we think of as classical music, which includes Baroque music, which was Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yes.
And that developed into what you know as classical music. It was all the 17th and 18th,
18th century.
and 19th centuries, really, and particularly the 18th and 19th centuries.
Yeah, you wouldn't just roll out of bed and say, when I leave school I want to be a musician, because chances are you did go to school if you're working or middle class anyway. You apprenticed or
The chances are you
worked in the
would
fields
follow,
or-
your father would be a musician.
Exactly.
You'd follow in his footsteps.
Exactly.
Like Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart,
Yeah.
the Mozart that we think of. His father was an accomplished musician and a court
The trade you
music
did.
director. Or whatever.
Yes, the trade you did was based on your family, isn't
Pretty
it?
much,
what your parents did, your father did.
Yeah. So
Anyway. What? I don't have to ask, you just stay there.
might be a suitable point to,
Oh, we're going to wrap up now. Okay, so we've gone from Nolia's description of early New Orleans jazz to Dave's suggestion that at some point it changed, the definition changed, and the musicians coming into the music, they sort of morphed into what we have today. And then I threw in a few bits and pieces here and there, giving my take, and we've ended up talking about early classical composers and how musicians earned a living in the 18th, 19th centuries, which is a good place to leave it for now. And I guess on the next episode, we're going to be merging these two subjects, these two genres. The classical, now we've touched on it, and the origins of jazz, and we're gonna meet somewhere in the middle and lead on from there.
You like
Excellent.
the ginger beer, right?
I'm okay, Nolia. Thank you.
No.
So you've been listening to Dave Williams, Nolia David, and myself, Owen CornerSpeak, on the CornerSpeak podcast. Music talk.
Oops, sorry.
What's the motto? Be safe, be strong, be creative. CornerSpeak. We out.
stay in school.